Hello, this is Arthur with Oceana Estates. In today's presentation, I would like to speak about the step-by-step process as to how to purchase your property once you've found your property. After finding the property that you wish to purchase, one of the key steps is to assess how much are you willing to pay for the property. In most cases, the price that we see is the asking price of the seller. It does not necessarily mean that the seller will get exactly the full listing price, but rather, in most cases, the buyer offers less and awaits the seller's response. The seller may counteroffer with a new asking price, or the seller may accept the offer. This scenario may differ when the seller receives multiple offers, which may lead to a higher final purchase price. On the second stage is when the offer is accepted. Once the buyer and the seller have agreed on a mutual price, the seller or buyer accept the offer and enter into a contract. A contract that specifies the buyer and the seller's names, the property in question, and the purchase price. The third step would be the good faith deposit and contract signing. Once the offer has been accepted, the real estate agent prepares the contract, signed by the buyer, that he or she is ready to buy. This is also known as the promissory note or promise to pay condition. It is recommended for the buyer to make a good faith deposit and set an expected closing date agreed by both parties. This deposit assures the seller that the contract is in force and the seller may not accept any additional offers made by other potential buyers. The deposit may be in the form of a check or a transfer of funds to an escrow account. Now let's talk about the difference between cash purchase versus obtaining financing. Here are a few details. When purchasing with cash or a payment due in full by closing, the buyer transfers the remaining balance to an escrow account owned by a title company or a broker's escrow account or an attorney's trust account. This is a separate type of account where the funds are being held up until the closing date. This account is owned by the title company, broker, or attorney. The title paperwork has been processed. The title company, broker, or attorney then transfer the funds to the seller. As a result, they play a role as a third party between the seller and the buyer, where they hold the funds until the legal paperwork is processed. In effect, the buyer and seller do not transfer the funds directly between each other. Obtaining financing, such as a mortgage, works quite similarly, yet with an additional step. The buyer would first have to get approved and provide a pre-approval letter to the seller, ensuring way of payment for the property. There are various financial institutions that work with real estate lending, and there are plenty of brokers that can assist with finding a lender. In this case, after receiving an approval from the lender, the buyer presents the seller with his or her form of payment. By the closing date, the lender transfers the loan amount in cash to the title, broker, or attorney's account, and the funds are then further transferred to the seller during the closing. At closing, when all the paperwork is signed and the buyer officially purchases the property, a title transfer occurs. A title transfer indicates that the then buyer is now the official owner of the property and the former seller no longer partakes ownership in the property. Proof of ownership is provided by a document called the deed. This document provides the new ownership details and entitles the new owner to enter and use the property. Here are some important notes to consider. When purchasing a property with a full cash payment, the new owner receives a clear title indicating that he or she is the new owner. On the other hand, when a purchase is made via a lender, a lien is put on the title. A lien is an instrument that indicates that the lender has rights of ownership if the payments for the loan are not received. Hence, the property is kind of owned by the lender until the full payment to satisfy the loan is received. That's when the new title will be issued without the lien. Buyers and sellers work with a third party, such as a title company or attorney, to ensure a free and clear transaction for the purchase of the property. This is used to keep both the buyer and the seller at ease and verifies that the transaction is fulfilled with the proper legal documentation. An important subject to mention is the appraisal. This is the process where a licensed professional assesses the value of the property in its existing condition. When purchasing in cash, it is optional yet recommended. But when a lender is involved, an appraisal may be mandatory. This allows the lender to use a value when it comes down to lending. For example, if a property is appraised at $100,000, it is unlikely for the lender to approve you for a loan of $150,000. In addition to the appraisal, an inspection is required by the lender, while with a cash offer it is optional yet also highly recommended. An inspection calls for another licensed professional that checks for the structure, plumbing, and holistic condition of the property, where any damages and undesirable conditions may affect the value of the property. Closing costs may typically cost between 2 and 5%. Here in Florida, it is safe to say that an expected of 3% should be accrued for in terms of closing costs. Want more helpful information about how to obtain a mortgage, where to buy, or explore more locations? Use the link below to download our presentation and subscribe to our page.